things off.
Okay.
So thank you everybody for joining. I'm Eva Dundas. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Branching Minds. I've really had a fantastic time during the summit. I know we're getting towards the end, so I hope you all have enjoyed your time as well. Thank you. Feel free to put in the chat where you're coming from and who you are. It's always great to see who everyone is and where people are coming from. Today's session I'm super excited about. So we have Dr. Mooney. She has been in education for over 15 years, working in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, coming from an ESL teacher to an ESL specialist, up through assistant principal and director of English learners. She also has her doctorate in educational leadership, where she has focused on differentiating differentiating support for various English proficiencies and building capacity for classroom teachers to support ELL and MLL students. So she also works as a consultant to support those trying to support English learners, and also as an adjunct professor at Salve Regina University in Rhode Island. So we are super excited to have her here today, where she's going to talk to us about how to best support those kiddos in an MTSS framework. And I've gone through the slides and I'm really excited to see what you have to share today. So thank you for joining us and presenting, and thank you to everyone who is joining. I'm gonna kick things over to her, but as questions are coming in, please feel to put them in the chat and I can compile them for any Q&A time that we have left at the end. All right. Yes. So thank you, Dr. Mooney, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So I learned you can see me, but I cannot see you, but I'm just giving you a big virtual hello here, and thank you for choosing my session. There's a lot of information in these slides that I know you will get, but please feel free to ask specific questions to your own school districts and school community, whatever you may be. And then my email is also attached if you need me to help and consult with you at the end. I'm happy to do so. So I do advise like a paper pencil for this session because there are some quick tools that you can use to bring back to either your administrative team, your MTSS team, and so on. So we will begin. So this is me. I am Dr. Ronnie Lee Mooney. I currently live in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, but I do work in Newport and Middletown, Rhode Island as the director of English learners there. So in a true ELL fashion, I have to create our session with a content objective and a language objective because we will be focusing on both. So today we're going to identify 3 processes, tools, or resources to apply to your own either RTI or MTSS system to determine the eligibility for an English learner. So our language objective will be to list and compare the practices shared in this presentation and identify the eligibility practices presented and align them with your own district. So I want you to keep that in the forefront, whatever I'm saying and how this could work in your building as well. So our session overview have this. We're basically going over some tips and tools for you to take back as well, just summarizing that for you. All right, and because we're in this wonderful conference, we all know what MTSS is. I'm using my time here today as a different lens of now, how do I use this for my English learners? Okay, so you're going to have either for a mindset of either gen ed, students that are constantly being referred or whatnot, but my lens today is going to be focusing on the ELL students. So, and the goal of MTSS is to ensure that all students have access to instruction and interventions they need to be successful, as well as to improve special education identification referral practices. And this isn't truly important for ELLs because sometimes ELLs are mistakenly in special education classes because they are over-identified and their learning differences are overlooked because they are learning a new language. And they may be under-identified as well because some districts might say, oh, the student has been in district for only X amount of time. We cannot refer him or her to MTSS. But know that MTSS can offer a roadmap for problem solving and finding the appropriate approach for each student. But from this slide alone, I want you to take away that there is no research that says that a student has to be in your school or in the country for X amount of time in order for them to begin part of the MTSS process and work. Okay, So we would rather think of this as a preventative approach than wait to fail. And this is for English learners, especially for academic skills in reading, math, and writing, social skills, and behavior. Keep this lens with an ELL because my district services a lot of SLIFE students, which is students with interrupted formal education or students with limited interrupted and formal education, as well as students that are exiting as well, or students that are even part of a Navy War College near us, and they come in the district with 3 or 4 languages under their belt and leaving in 1 year. So I have seen all of it. And an MTSS process can begin for any of those students because these are the skills that the MTSS system will support. So keep in mind, we are focusing on a 3-tiered system, tiered 1, tiered 2, tiered 3, just like we do for our vocabulary for our students. Tier 1 is everybody. If you look at the image on the bottom, that's everybody in your class, everybody in your school. So that ensures all students have access to general education and curriculum. And they are students, especially ELLs, are not pulled out during that time. That is their civil right to be part of that classroom work. So a tier 2 is the targeted group interventions, and this provides strategic interventions to some students. That's the middle picture. And tier 3 is the individual intensive interventions. You'll see that smaller group. It keeps dwindling down. That provides intensive intervention for students who are not at grade level and who are struggling. I hope that helped to visualize it. So this is text heavy here, but it has wonderful information and a lot of data that I think you could take back to your own schools and really work on this. So let's think about tier 1, core instruction ensures everybody every day. On an everyday basis, no student is taken out for your core. And I'm thinking elementary, middle, and high. No one's taken out for core math, core reading, core science, core social studies, whatever it may be. Now, when do I provide those interventions, you're asking? Well, just know that I'll get to a question I'm going to ask, but tier 2 is that smaller middle group, the targeted group interventions. So here you're going to provide strategic intervention for a group of students, especially your ELL students. So this is about 5 to 6 strong cycles of a 6-week period. And that is based on what does this child need as an intervention in order to grow. So keep in mind, this is 4 to 6 students, not 15 or 20 that got X amount wrong on a quiz. And these groups are using evidence-based strategies and sometimes a curriculum. So for example, I put on the underneath that repeated reading intervention 3 times a week for 20 minutes. It's ensured that it's 4 to 6 weeks to truly evaluate if it's happening to help the student. And then you would also collaborate with your ESL teacher to provide support and feedback on what you are delivering, and you're getting some information from them as well. It has to be a collaborative approach, especially if you have an ELL student and you are the general education teacher. And this goes for administrators as well. I urge you to maybe look at your schedule. Where can they have this collaborative time? Can you provide a stipend? Could you provide some time, some payment after school for them to have this time to do so? Because it makes a difference. Now let's go to your tier 3. Remember, this is that small group of individual intensive interventions. And these are for students who are not at grade level or who are struggling. And in my situation, it's many, if not most of the English learners in my district. So they are getting the double dose of targeted small group intervention using evidence-based strategic interventions based on your data. So that is whatever core curriculum that your school or district is using. And so 5% of that 20% will receive something more intensive. And I'm saying a 1-to-1, a 1-to-2, or a 1-to-3. And that intervention may be not at grade level, but the idea is to provide more direct kinds of instructional approaches for the student so they can access the gaps in knowledge. That is what that small group work is going to be. If they are a 6th grader, I'm not promoting that you're using kindergarten work, but you're scaffolding that 6th grade work so that it is at their level so that they can start to close the gap. I know that was a lot there, but this is the roadmap that we've been using in the districts that I work in. So my trick question was going to be, is English language support development a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3? And the answer is it's tier 1. And please know that English language learner services is not an intervention. That is their civil rights. There's no this or that. There's not special ed trumps ELL. We get more money for special ed than ELL. totally understandable, but they deserve both, and that is their civil rights. And I keep going back to that because this can become law, and you might have some battles going through with your State Department if services are not provided accordingly. So Tier 1 instruction for ELLs, they should have access to general ed curriculum, as we talked about before, and also their ELL service time with their ELL teacher. And because of the richness in vocabulary, comprehension, gen ed curriculum should be accessible to most students. They have to be exposed to it. And it's an indicator of effective, high quality instruction. And we know that our ELL students are also given state assessments. So if we're taking them out of core, while they're supposed to be exposed to all of that rich language and comprehension and reading, then when would they actually have that time to do that? If in their ELL class or pull out, whatever it may be, they're doing their foundational language or drilling down skills. So a common question might be, so you're saying that MTSS is basically the roadmap to get into special ed. And I'm saying absolutely not. It's literally the opposite. We are putting things in place to avoid getting to special ed as the catch-all end all. That is not what special education is about. The MTSS system for me, in my view, is to improve progress monitoring. It's to collect the data, to analyze, review. If it's working, I'm going to continue on a different skill for that student for another 4 to 6 weeks. It's increasing collaboration with the ELL teacher. What do you see in your ELL pullout or push in? What can I do in my gen ed classroom? You are going to examine language proficiency and developmental indicators. This is meaning looking at the student's background and determining have they had prior schooling before that they arrive to you. Can they read and write on their grade level in their native language? Those are just some tools that you would have to examine in order to determine have they been in a rigorous school environment as well. Like I said, in my district, we don't have always that being the case. Also take cultural considerations into account. So this might mean that school is valued in some cultures as it may not be. Some genders might have gone to a certain grade level, then they would have to pay for it in their country, and maybe that student has not participated in school. So you got to do a deep dive into the background of the student and determine what their schooling time frame is as well. What is schooling month in Guatemala? Is it January to September? Is it different in France or wherever the students may be? Because that also determines, I have the student in a 9th grade placement, but really, he's only completed grade 7 based on the transcript audit. So you have to think about that as well. And then I'm going to get into comparison with a true peer in the MTSS process to review. So here are the 8 non-negotiables. So in order for MTSS to work for ELLs, this is what you, your team, your district really needs to have in order for it to be successful. So number 1, educators must understand that language acquisitions processes and the stages at which students require English is different for every student. So a typical behavior for a student at that stage is going to be very different from a newcomer that is in your classroom. So if I have a 4th grade student that has been here since kindergarten, that's going to be completely different than a 1st grade student that's never been to Head Start, or a 6th grade student that is starting with you that's never been to school, or you might have someone that's now in 8th grade that's been here since 1st grade. So everyone is different. I'm going to get into what are those stages of language acquisition because it's very different. Number 2, educators must know typical behaviors of an English learner from the child's native language group. For example, an Arabic speaker often struggles with the phoneme p as it's not represented in the Arabic language. This is typical and not a sign of disability. So there's a lot of research out there that shows you the comparison of our English alphabet compared to other language alphabets. And if you're doing a reading fluency test and you're marking them wrong because that language doesn't have a certain sound, then that is not an error on anybody's part, right? It's just not knowing the differences of language. For example, if Spanish doesn't have the Z sound, the Z, would a gen ed teacher mark it wrong on an assessment if he or she did not know that that was not even a sound in that child's language. Okay, so we really have to make sure that we compare the both and really look into that with our ELL teacher. Okay, number 3, multi-tiered teams must include a representation from all appropriate educators. So if you are sitting and you are talking about a student, it's never going to be just 2 people at that table. I urge you, please have the ESL teacher at that meeting and for all of the meetings. That that ELL teacher might have a connection with that ELL student that Gen Ed might not. Or that ELL teacher might have a connection with the family and has all this information that you might not, especially the home language survey and the family survey that families have to complete in order to register for your school. So those 2, the ELL teacher really has the most access to those records. So that's why I'm urging you to get that ELL teacher on that team. So obviously you're going to have a special education teacher, the general education teacher. You might have an MTSS coordinator and or an administrator at that table as well. So all of those members must also include the parents and the information often only parents can provide about the child's first language acquisition. This is when we're asking, when did your child begin to learn a language, any language? When did they start to learn English? Did they ever repeat a grade? Did your child ever have any difficulty listening, speaking, reading, and writing? Right? We're focusing on the 4 domains. We need to know that information from the parent in order to move forward. And I want to go over what these stages of second language acquisition are. So if you start from the top, it's pre-production. So for the WIDA states that are on here now, there's entering, beginning, developing, expanding, bridging, and fully exited. So I'm not going to read this all to you, but look at how different the stages of second language acquisition varies. So when I'm in a pre-production as a newcomer SIFE student, this stage is absorbing the new language, but it's not producing it yet. So it's building receptive vocabulary and listening skills. So if you ever took a language in high school, you know that maybe period 1 of the first day in class, and maybe the teacher's speaking Spanish or French or Italian, and you're sitting there a little bewildered by everything. This is what is happening to our L students as well. So then the students begin speaking and writing using single words, short phrases. There may be many errors still present, like want water, bathroom, need help. So this is all familiarity with the stages of second language acquisition. I just wanted you to be aware of those if this is not your background here. Okay. And then with this, the stages of second language acquisition, I want you to look at the 3rd column, the approximate time frame of how long these students are in this stage. So we know that the pre-production stage is also called the silent period. And that means students may be silent completely with just maybe some head nods or pointing or smiling for 0 to 6 months or even up to a year. If that child is coming to you from a heavy trauma background, that might be from a journey across countries, physical or mental trauma, or anything that may have happened during the journey with their family, this is all affecting them, and they might shut down and be silent for that time, but be very cooperative in class, right? A pleasure to have in class, does everything I ask him or her to do, but just might not produce much language yet. This is totally normal. But you might also get students that come in first day and want to learn immediately. Just know that every child is different, just like every gen ed student is different as well. So when we go to early production, speech emergence, you can see the characteristics. This is what students can produce at this time and how long it will take them to get there. And I put some teacher prompts on the right so that you can see like what type of verbs and prompts can I be asking these students at this type of stage. And there's also the WIDA can-do descriptors. If you just Google those, you can find what, in reading, speaking, listening, writing, what students can do at different levels as well. On the last column, you'll see about words. I added that in, and that's for research about how many words can that child acquire during that time of stage. So it's a lot of words and it's quick, but to know up to 6,000 words, that is almost at our level, intermediate fluency and advanced fluency. So it does take time, but they have to be asked to speak every single day with you for academic language, just not social language, but really what you're working on. I'm getting off my newcomer rant here, but I just wanted to show you the trajectory of the levels: level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. If you don't have an L background, quickly I'll go over these. The decimal point is very important. If I have a 1.1, that's very different on how I will scaffold for a student that's a 1.9, because I am pushing that child to a level 2 of emerging. So everything counts. 1.0 is a typical newcomer SLIFE student. But once you get into the developing, I want to focus on that for a little bit, the 3.0 to 3.9. Those children need high support with literacy, because we know that level 1 and level 2 are listening or speaking. That's developing really quickly. We're learning, we're speaking, we're getting conversations here and there. But once I get to developing, that's where most of the L's in my district stop. They stop improving because they got all that foundational English under their belt. But once they get to this part where the CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency, when we're asking them to synthesize and evaluate and justify and apply, that's where they struggle. So this is where that tier 2 comes in. I'm going to look at a literacy domain on their WIDA access scores, and I'm going to create my groups based on that. And then by the time they get to the 4 and 5s, they should be exiting. Doesn't mean they can't qualify though. All right, let's go back to our final group of the 8 non-negotiables. So number 4, educators must be properly trained to select and implement evidence-based interventions. So select evidence-based practices must have research to support their use with English learners. It's just not Googling, hey, I found these worksheets and it says they're great for English learners. Let's print them out and make a group for 4 to 6 weeks. I'm not saying that whatsoever. We've adopted Haggerty, and I'm not sure about your district, but that is what we are using to provide our interventions with our students that are ELs. Number 5, progress monitoring strategies and instruments must be clearly understood and regularly used by the teacher. This means in many cases, I have a student, he's been here for a year or 2 in the country. He's not learning much English, and I think he should be referred. And so we will push back as a team and say, okay, where is your data? Have you progress monitored for 4 to 6 weeks? Where is any of that information? Have you had any scales completed? Do you have any surveys completed? Any documentation of beginning of year, middle of the year, end of year? And what are the interventions in between? Number 6, data related to student progress must in part be quantified, charted, and used as a foundation for making subsequent educational decisions. So this data, let's say I have a meeting on Friday. All of this data for this one child should be submitted a week prior. That is almost as if we were submitting for, say, a school committee meeting, right? So that everyone on the team has an opportunity to read it over and speak to it. We know that many times we have those MTSS meetings on one child and we have maybe 25 minutes. I don't want to waste my time, your team's time of reading all of that right then, right? That's not helpful for the student. I want you to be able to come to the team, read all of that, analyze that, ask questions, push back, have a collegial, conversation about what can we do to move forward. So I'm not saying make a chart, but when I say charted, that just means in an organized way so that we can have a conversation about the next steps for the child. But I do love a good chart. So. All right, number 7, educators should gather as much holistic data as possible, including but not limited to the child's health and educational history, social and behavioral data, and native language assessments. So we have, say, STAR Math as our universal screener. So sometimes the English learner students will be given it in Spanish as well, and only the beginning of the year. And I'm not saying do it again in middle of year, end of year, but you could. And if they are in the MTSS process, I probably would suggest that you do that, but it doesn't have to be the case if that English learner is not in MTSS. And the answer is because I don't have a bilingual program. So that child is not given instruction in math in Spanish the whole year. So I'm just screening him or her in the beginning of the year. I'm not providing any academics in Spanish. So why would I give them the Spanish again in the middle of the year and the end of the year? That doesn't do anything for me because I've been teaching English this whole time, unless they're in MTSS. All right, and number 8 is check-in meetings with the MTSS team. It can't be a one and done or on the fly, like, oh, can I squeeze in this ELL student? I know we have 20 other gen ed students or whatever it may be. No, they have to be scheduled. When you leave that meeting, you have another 1 or 2 already planned for that year. So those are the 8 non-negotiables in order to have a successful process for your English learner. Okay. So I want you to, we're going to do a case study right now. And this is me circling back to the comparison with the true pair. So an additional step that may be also helpful is comparing students to each other. And I'm saying this in a positive way so that we can find a true pair, because everything is different for each L student. So language proficiency, culture, and all of their background experiences, the age and time in the United States, acculturation in adapting to a new environment, use of L1 and L2 at home. This means their first language and second language at home, school and community. And when you are doing, I'm going to pause here, when you are doing the MTSS process and you're asking families, when does the child speak another language? I'm just going to say Spanish because that's what we use often. It's not, just tell me how often. The family will probably say, oh, every day. Okay, every day, and I write that down. I'm urging you to be as specific as possible. Okay, so when your son wakes up at 6:30, can you confirm from 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. he's only using Spanish? Oh, no, it's till 7:45. Okay. And then English, I'm assuming for the whole day. And then from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m., what does that look like? I want to know how often the other L1 is being impacted on the L2. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's just information that you're gathering. And then last bullet, education experiences and services such as dual language instruction, transitional bilingual instruction, ELL services, or a sheltered English instruction, which is a newcomer model. So you want to know, when you were in a different district or in a different country, did you have any other services that helped your language development? They might come back and say, oh yeah, we were taught English every single day, or I was in ESL in a different district before I moved here. So, and a quick question, I know that some people will ask about, can I offer a bilingual program? I do not offer a bilingual program in my district because when we did a grant with a college, long story short, we found out that many of our students were not bilingual. Although they spoke 2 languages, they were not literate in 2 languages. So in order to have a bilingual program, those students have to show some type of literacy in Spanish for sure, and the English will develop. So, and we also do not have a dual language program. That would be learning 2 contents at the same time as you build the program up so that those students are leaving the program being truly bilingual as well. And the dual language, if you're interested, is you're starting as an English speaker so that you are learning to become bilingual. Anyway, so I'm going to give you a little time to do this activity. And I'm saying 2 minutes. It's not long. So here is the scenario. And I love a good Venn diagram. So Jose is a 4th grade student from Mexico City who has had regular, consistent schooling in Mexico and comes to the United States with strong literacy in Spanish. But Miguel is a 4th grade student from a rural part of Mexico who came to the United States as a toddler. His parents are migrant farm workers, and he has moved around to many different schools in the United States. Sometimes he's only attended bilingual programs, and sometimes he's been in English-only programs. So in the chat, tell me, how are they similar? And Eva, I can't see if anyone's writing. I'm just going to pop over while you're doing that. Oh, she might have landed. Let me see.
Are you able to see the chat, or do you want me to read them off?
Could you just read me 3 if you don't mind?
There's a lot that are saying both from Mexico. Both are 4th grade students from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Both have exposure to both English and Spanish. Both likely exhibit conversational English.
Oh, I love that.
Spanish is first language. Similar age and home language.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. Now tell me, how are they different?
Still not much coming in, but I will kick things off and say one has had regular and consistent instruction where the other hasn't.
That's right.
Yep. A bunch of that started coming in. One
Great.
has consistent schooling, the other has not. Rural culture versus urban culture.
Mm-hmm.
Different stages of English acquisition.
Thank you.
Different ages entering the US.
Mm-hmm.
One has strong background in native language. One has gone between languages.
Perfect. And we can stop there. Those were wonderful. Thank you so much for participating. So I want, from this activity, I just want you to be able to, compare, but not truly compare unless you have students that are very similar to one another on where their language journey should be. Does anyone have any questions about this activity and comparing, 2 children or 3 children, even though they've been from the same country? There's so many different aspects that the children come with that we can't just put a Band-Aid on everyone and say, oh, everybody from, X country can qualify. That was the point of this. And looking for those nitty-gritty differences in between students' backgrounds, which plays a key part. So if I have someone coming with strong literacy skills in Spanish, I know that's going to be very easy for Jose to transfer over into English. Whereas, Miguel might have had some time in bilingual programming, but now he just went into English only. And for how long? So I can't trust that his Spanish content comprehension is as strong as possibly Jose's. So, all right, I will move on if there's nothing in between here. All right, so this was just our recap of the similarities and differences for both of them. And so if Jose and Miguel are given the same assessments of language and literacy, whether it's English or Spanish, we know that they're likely to perform very differently in both languages. Therefore, they are not true peers, and comparing their performance is inappropriate. However, if other students share some of the characteristics described above, it may be easier to see patterns among students and to use the commonalities as a benchmark for evaluating individual or group progress. So here's just a quick snapshot, of finding a true pair. The language proficiency, cultural and experiential backgrounds are similar. Age and time in the United States, acculturation, use of language of the first language and the second language at home, school, and in the community as well, and the educational experiences and their programming as well. Right. Next one. So I know we do have many administrators, but also for the teachers as well. You know that you have many kids in your room and every day you are juggling who's coming in, who's pulling what student out, who's pushing in to do X, Y, Z. So if you're having a difficulty saying, well, how do I even make this work? That's great that you're saying 4 to 6 weeks, tier 2, pull them out. But I have 15 other kids and I have to pull them every day for this in order to provide this team, this MTSS data. And the answer is yes. I did it. So I know that is difficult. Absolutely. But it can be done. So it's worth taking a look at students' daily schedules, their weekly schedules, and how much time they're spending in transitions and missing class time. This is even for if you're a teacher or an administrator and you have, you're supervising teachers, like what is their minute to minute classroom look like? Is there missing class time where education and academics is missing, right? What does their morning meeting look like? Can that be reduced and added more academics? So this is a lot of transitions in the classroom is very different and difficult for ELLs who are referred to multiple specialists because, oh, now you're going to go to reading. Now you're going to have this MTSS group, but you also have to have your ELL teacher as well. So they're already experiencing trauma, probably struggling with all of this, and they're newcomers to our country. Our job is to reduce that. So think about what kinds of supports are available in your school that if students have had very little school experience or if they've experienced trauma. They might benefit for a lot of structure and attention from the same group of teacher on a small regular basis. So can you have your ELL teacher push in so that that child or children can see the ELL teacher and gen ed at the same time? And for elementary students, this may mean reducing the number of transitions and classroom switches throughout the day. It's very overwhelming, and even for our gen ed students as well. So for secondary, consider connecting students with adult mentors that can provide a check-in each day, as well as a place to take a break when needed. So just some ideas for you there. All right, so I'm going to put a prompt for you, and you're going to put in the chat, or if you don't feel comfortable, write down your answer. I genuinely would love for you to answer this. Okay, first one. If we label an L as having special education needs, at least he or she gets some more help. And it's okay if you genuinely feel like, yeah, I do feel that way. Try to see if I can read.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of no's. And then two other main themes. Not being proficient in English is not a disability. And it's also not the right type of support for that student.
That's well said. So this is a lot of language, but this answers that question, that backs it up. So this is untrue. So a special education placement, when none is warranted, does not serve the student well. First, think about it. We're bestowing on the student a stigmatizing label that the student does not need. Second, interventions that are not specifically geared to help processing linguistic or cognitive disabilities often do not help children acquire second language proficiency. Although it's a small group, although it's a smaller one-to-one interaction with the teacher, what they're doing in those groups are completely different. Sometimes the scaffolding and the differentiation does help in both groups, absolutely, but it does not warrant them to be in special ed. So traditional special education services can limit the kind of learning that ELLs need, and I'm saying English learners. Special education interventions tend to target a narrow selection of skills to enable mastery and discrete skills that are often practiced out of context, like almost like a kill and drill, which can complicate the learning process for ELLs because they need a meaningful context in order to comprehend the language that surrounds them. And lastly, special education interventions often use reading materials with controlled phonics and vocabulary, and they are focusing on structures of language, which reduces meaningfulness, sometimes of the task, and constricts language usage, making it more difficult for ELLs to understand and retain information. And sometimes we're asking students, fill in the blank or match, and that's getting one word or two word phrases, whereas that might be getting the answer for one group, but for English learners, we need to expand because it's not a disability, it's just they do not have the language yet. Next, we have to wait 3 to 7 years for English learners to develop their English language skills before we can rule out language as a cause for the student's difficulty.
I'm getting some untruths and no's.
Mm-hmm. And if you're like, I have no idea, that's okay. So if we think back to BICS versus CALP, BICS, basic intercommunicational skills, that's your social language, that's playground language, locker room kind of language. That takes 1 to 3 years. But the CALP, CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency, that takes 4 to 7 or 5 to 7 years. So if I have a ninth grader and they're just enrolling, I cannot expect that that ninth grader will graduate at the same level as a gen ed student has been here since K or born here. That is not, it logistically cannot happen unless you have a student that is highly motivated, has opportunities before and after school to get that. But in my background and experience, I have not had that case. So going back to the prompt. So although it takes 4 to 7 years for English learners to show they know academic achievement tests, there's no need to withhold any kind of support services that an L might need in the meantime. So if a student truly has an intrinsic difficulty, then it exists in all of the student's languages and in most use of their contexts. So the sooner these exceptionalities are identified and supported, the better opportunity the student has to be successful in school. So I'm going to repeat what I said early on. I've heard a million times throughout a year, oh, so-and-so just came here last year. So we would have to wait at least 3 years in order to start MTSS. We need him or her to make sure that they have at least 3 years under their belt before we can start this. And I've done so much research this on, and I push back at my own special education director and I say, why? Every student is different. So what if I do have a newcomer student who actually might be at a level 4 by year 2? I have to wait 1 whole year just to say it's been 3 years for me to put them into the MTSS? Absolutely not. The whole goal of this is to learn that my student is not learning, right? And what is it going to take? What skill can I focus on? Provide that support and determine, is he or she actually making growth? And then I move on from there. Last one. Oh, that was just 2. Sorry, I only gave you 2. All right. So I'm going to move forward just because I'm looking at time. And if you have any questions and whatnot. So I'm going to go back a little bit. Okay. Actually, I will go back. I'm sorry. I don't mean to make you dizzy. So when you do get to the team and you have all of this evidence, now you're saying, okay, I've gathered all this evidence. You know, the child is just not making as much progress, if not any at all. So here's the information from the variety of sources that you will need. You need parent input, teacher observations and recommendations, or even a different teacher to do those observations on that child. And then learning the physical condition of the child, like can they hold the pencil? Is there anything happening with their mouth or their teeth? We just have a lot of students that are coming with dental issues that might prohibit them speaking a certain way. So we get them, Molar Express or resources with dental programs, and that will help them and not hinder them. And then also social or cultural backgrounds as well. So for parent input, what do I need to ask from the parent? So we need to know how long the child's been speaking and exposed to their home language, what time frame. Keep in mind that it's typical for a child learning a second language to have a silent period. Are there difficulties in both the child's home language and the new language? Does mom see that, or dad or grandma, whoever it is, do they see that at home as well, not just their teacher? And are the concerns evident in multiple settings? Is it at home, after school programs, on the basketball team, or is it just in one setting? And then the teacher observations recommendations. Has developmentally appropriate strategies been delivered systematically? Has it been routinely 4 to 6 weeks for the interventions? Has these strategies produced significant differences in the student's learning and development? You should see a boost in language. And a child's developmental delay or disability would be observable in both languages and across multiple settings. So you cannot have a disability in one language, but not in the other. So I urge you to get a different assessment in their native language, or you're partnering with a company that can come in or do a virtual assessment in that native language. Because if I'm going to determine that you have a learning delay or whatever it may be in English, then I need to see that you have that in Spanish as well. Otherwise, we will not qualify that child in my district. Unless we've provided a bilingual assessment, and I'm not just saying Spanish, we have Urdu, we have Italian. I mean, we have paid a lot of money for these assessments and screeners to be conducted with students and families so that we are doing right by the child. Because we know that sometimes once they get into special ed, it's really hard to get out. So why are we just going to say, okay, we're just going to help them and put them in a program without doing everything we can? So you might say, well, what if I learn that it's different? There is a disability there. I'm sorry, there is not a disability in Spanish, but there is one that we're seeing in English. Then I would go back to the data and I would go back to all of those interventions that teacher or teachers have been doing and making sure that it's systematic and then it's been 4 to 6 weeks and it's been, the attendance is there as well. And then is it really whatever the team is suggesting as that disability? But there's more to be said for that as well. But I have not seen in a few cases that we've done this, that they are not visible in both languages. And I added some speech things because I know many of you here work with speech and language pathologists, and they are a foundational, immense amount of knowledge. Your SLPs are right in line with your English language learner teachers. They have all of this information and knowledge based on all of their clinical work. So they have all of these scales and assessments that they could use in order to help the determination. All right, so I'm going to read in the pink. So the determination of eligibility for early childhood or any K-12 special education services must not rest on one test. So you might say, oh, we did the Wyatt, or we did, whatever it cannot happen. So a combination of results based, but not limited to, standardized and performance-based measures, multiple observations of the child across settings and routines, and input from family members, professionals last year and the year before, teachers, and other adults who interact routinely with this child. The results of the evaluation must clearly demonstrate a disability in delay in all of the child's languages. A child cannot have a disability in one language or a particular context and not the other. These special education needs would manifest themselves across languages and contexts. That's a lot to say. And so this is just, how do I get all of that information? Where can I go to get these assessments or screeners or tools or information? This slide is just for all of you to kind of go back and where can I find these scores? That's it for you here. I talk very fast, but I'm just trying to look at the time. So, okay. And if we go back to thinking about speech and language specific sounds and shared sounds, this is going back to the slide when I said you really have to look at the alphabet and determine, by what age the sounds are developmentally appropriate for that child's mouth. I know it gets nitty gritty here, but these are the things we really have to look into in order to make that full evaluation. So there are sounds unique to their first language compared to sounds that are unique to their second language, L2. And I'm going to use English versus Spanish just because that's where the majority of the students in my district lie, but you can do this with any language if you think about it. So these numbers are based on by age 4, 5, 7, 7.5, 8.5. And this is the developmental articulation norms. This is where English speaking students or students speaking English will have the mouth capacity to create these sounds. So by age 4, they would know the first column. By age 5, they've mastered those. By age 7, the V and the ing, and so on. So if you are, let's say, in first grade teacher and you're learning that your child cannot get the V sound, we'll know that by age 7, that's when the mastery is, and that is not a disability or speech qualifying for an English learner student. I just added these for you, just some extra resources for you. And then for Spanish, this is their developmental articulation norms. Their alphabet is different than ours. So you're going to see from age 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is different than what English expectations are, because the Spanish alphabet has doubling sounds, removal of consonants. So if I go back to English, you can see how much they have to know by a certain age, and then to Spanish. So that's why doing a comparison and evaluation of both languages is crucial. And articulation differences. These are just getting into the nitty gritty of what deletion, distortion, replacement might sound like. I added these because there are some teachers that might say, oh, the student can't do blank. So for example, the top right, the reason. So don't becomes done. The reason is there's no final t and no final clusters in the Spanish language. So if they've never been exposed to the word don't, or even the sound t, they will not automatically add it to their new vocabulary. That has to be explicitly taught over and over again. Second reason, so spaghetti becomes spaghetti. The reason is there's no initial s cluster in Spanish. We know be like escuela, this. And so the attaches to any s sound. That's not an error. It's an articulation difference that needs to be taught. And last one, this becomes dis. The reason is there's no th. So the brain chooses the most familiar sound from their first language, which is the t sound. So again, there's no th, the th in Spanish. So the first instinct is to use the t sound. I don't know if the sounds are coming across, so I had to animate those. And then phonological processes as well. These are just some speechy things for you as well if you were to find a commonality with a student that might be typical versus atypical. So for example, the final consolation deletion, do for dog, right? They dropped the G. That's normal. But an atypical is using og for dog, which is the initial consonant deletion. Okay. I'm not going on there. And so, time. All right, my last and final thing I've said to you 100 times, but that's the crux of this. A student cannot have a disability in one language or particular context and not another. The special education needs would manifest themselves across languages and contexts. So we need to make sure that we are searching for companies or another district that has this type of language. They're saying, how are you doing your assessments in order to possibly qualify or disqualify for MTSS or special education services? So I really want to push you for that, to get those assessments in the first language of the child. Okay. So just to recap, I'm coming to the end here. Did we meet our content and language objective? I hope you were able to read, review with me 3 processes or tools and that we were applying for the MTSS process for an English learner. In our language objective, were you able to compare some of your practices to some of the ones that I was able to share with you today? So I feel like we did that, especially with your answers. And those are my references there for you. And then I left some time for questions. Sorry, I speak very fast.
All right. Thank you so much for that. We did get some questions coming in through the chat. Mm-hmm. We had 2 questions specifically related to progress monitoring. So which progress monitoring tools does your district use, or what would you recommend? The other was about recommendations around if you should progress monitor students in their native language.
Great questions. I'm writing them down so I get to them. Okay. So unless you have a bilingual program, can I get off the screen? Like, can I?
Yeah, if you stop sharing.
Okay. All right. Well, do you want me to put that up right now? This?
Yeah, you can leave that up for a second, but then stop sharing so we can get fuller screen.
Okay.
Looks like she hit the wrong stop sharing button. It's super confusing. There's a button to stop sharing your screen, and then there's a button to stop sharing audio and video. Oh, looks like you hit the wrong Yeah, you're back. So that's the stop sharing audio. Got it this time.
Okay, so do I progress monitor in native language? Only if you have a bilingual program, because if I'm an only English speaker, or even if I did speak that other language, my point of the MTSS process is that they are learning and gaining skills in language in English. Can they do that? So unless you have a truly bilingual transitional program, dual language program, that's when you bring in progress monitoring for the native language. And then is there a progress monitoring tool? So I'm not sure if you mean for MTSS or for language. For language, we do not. We are a WIDA state in Rhode Island. We do not have any language proficiency monitoring tool. We use the WIDA model. We use Access in January, February. I know some districts use the WIDA model to do their progress monitoring. So it does take some time, but if you are a low incidence district, you can do that. There's also success with Pearson has a tool called TELL, all capital letters, TELL. I know a district near me is using that as well, that I would actually like to look into it. So I wanted to share that with you. So,
yeah. So then this is a step, then we can kind of maybe bring it back to progress monitoring when we're talking about ELs who are brought up for receiving tier 2 support. Because they are not testing well in English. So if their data shows that they are proficient in Spanish or their other native language, what are your thoughts on them receiving tier 2 level of support?
I will ask by who. I do not want them taken out of the room for that tier 2. If I'm the gen ed teacher and I know they need tier 2 support, then that's happening right after my core lesson. I'm pulling them to my front, wherever it may be, and we're doing a tier 2 support lesson there. And if I'm catching on that, I'm having the same kids come to me quite often, I'm starting a new MTSS group. I'm starting a process for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So similar to all students, that tier 2 level of support should never replace that
Right.
tier 1 or core instruction.
Mm-hmm.
For students who might be ELs who are receiving that tier 2 level of support, does that change what type of progress monitoring assessments or plans that you would be using? Would it be similar to testing basic skills, similar to non-EL students?
Yes, you are testing to what those students need, not this program says I have to test this for XYZ, because the students in front of me might not need that. So I have to determine, these students are not adding suffixes all the time. They are not able to comprehend multi-step questions, or they are not able to complete linear equations, something like that. So you are creating that work based on the need of that group.
Awesome. And someone in referencing the pushback of bringing a student up for a potential referral, is there particular information that you request that your teachers collect prior to that meeting? Like what should they be bringing to you?
Yes, so we have a strong MTSS. So I will brag, but we use Esther money to get an MTSS coordinator at each of our buildings. So she, and it is a female at each building, so she will have basically almost like an intake packet that the person that's referring the child will have to complete in order to start that process, to start the eligibility or initial meeting. And so if that gen ed teacher doesn't know the background of the EL student, she's going to the permanent record folder and looking for the home language survey or the family survey, so the family interview survey. So you're gathering all of that information. I might even call the mom myself, get a translator to help me answer these questions. Refer to your ELL staff, because they might know something that you haven't known for 5 months that they knew within 1 minute. So please use them as a resource. Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts? There's a few more questions. I don't know how quickly. One's asking what your thoughts are on SIPs. SIPPS. I don't know if you're not familiar, then it's just all capital letters, SIPPS.
I will look into it. that's student improvement plan for me, so I don't know. All right, I will look into SIPs. So maybe whoever you are, could you email me? You have my slide deck, and then I can do this a little bit more and help you. Be happy to do that.
Awesome. And then the translational, for students who are in a transitional bilingual program, do you recommend doing universal screening in native language and English 3 times a year as
Yes,
well?
absolutely. Yes. I do, because you are truly, and I love bilingual programming. That and dual language are my dreams, but that is the true tell of doing all of the language and giving the assessments, teaching. So you would progress monitor that because you are teaching 2 languages at the same time, for sure.
Yeah. So even if the goal is to transition them out of that bilingual program, if you are teaching in both, you should be assessing in both.
Right. If you're teaching it, you're assessing it.
Awesome. Well, we are at time, a little over, but thank you so much for sharing this with us. It was really helpful information, and I can tell from the chat that people got a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And I think everyone saw that the slides are there and available. I also shared the link, and they'll still continue to be accessible to participants, as well as the recording that we'll release, I think, next week. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time and you being here.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.